Go.
Dear learners, it is a great opportunity to share one of our best friend, Mr. Glenn Maggie, experience with us. And now he delivered his some experience with us to know about prosthetics and orthodontics. Please start
Thank
your
you.
experience.
Right. As you know, my name's Glenn. I come from Glasgow, which is in Scotland. It's the biggest city in Scotland, but not the capital. How did I start? I started in orthotics in 1976, which is probably before most of you were born. I started as a technician. I went in originally as a technician. I did 6 years as a technician. Then I went to university and I did an honours degree in prosthetics and orthotics, which was in the National Centre of Prosthetics and Orthotics in Britain is in Glasgow. It's at Strathclyde University. I did 4 years there. And then from there, I decided I would then travel abroad. And the first country I went to was North Sudan. And I went out to North Sudan and I then worked in North Sudan for 3.5 years. I was meant to only go for 2. And then what happened was, just near the end of 2 years was the beginning of Band-Aid. Can anybody remember all the refugees? No, I don't know. There were a big famine in Ethiopia, and millions of refugees came into North Sudan, and I ended up getting involved in that, not doing orthotics or prosthetics, but actually doing logistics of helping to set up refugee camps. From there, I went back to London and I did a course called Teachers in Technology in Developing Countries at London University for a year. And then from there, I came to Bangladesh and actually worked with CRP for about 3 years when they were based at Farmgate. And there I helped to try to set up the start of orthotics and prosthetics. Really do a kind of most of a kind of community-based service. From there I then left and I went to Uganda in Africa, Central Africa, and I worked for 3 years with the Red Cross and helping them to rebuild the orthotic and prosthetic government hospital, which was based in Kampala. Uganda had gone through 20 years, roughly, of civil war with mostly, you'll know, as Idi Amin, but there were also another president called Obote, who was just as bad, and the country was in a real mess. They had thrown out, if you remember in the early 70s, they threw out all the Asian population. So then they had a lack of doctors, they had a lack of physio, they had lack of everything. It was a real mess. Stayed there 3 years. Then I decided to come back and I decided to put down my roots. And I decided I then went back and I worked in Scotland in the National Health Service, the NHS. And I worked there in orthotics for 20 years. And I then, luckily, I retired last year. Really, I'm now 59 and I decided to retire at the age of 58 to do something else, but I don't know what yet. But I've come out to Bangladesh again. But what can I say about orthotics and prosthetics? Orthotics and prosthetics is very different than it is in Bangladesh. One reason is you must have an honours degree to teach in it. You also, when you've actually got your degree, is when you qualify, you then decide either you want to go into orthotics or you want to go into prosthetics. It's very strange because you actually train to do both, but in practice you can't actually do. In practice you can't practically do it, and it's due to funding. The way orthotics is funded in Britain is through the health board, Well, prosthetics is funded centrally by the government. So the government sets up prosthetic centres regionally. So you work with the government. So if you go into orthotics, you then work with the local health board. And really they don't mix. We know each other, but we actually can't professionally mix. It's quite strange. I worked in a hospital that had the biggest prosthetic centre in Scotland, and I worked in the orthotics, and we hardly ever crossed paths. It's quite strange. So I ended up really working in orthotics, and I did 20 years in Britain, and I specialised in stroke, which is a huge amount in Scotland. There are a huge number of stroke victims due to Scotland having been a heavy smoking country. Something like 70% of males used to smoke. It's now gone down to about 20%. A heavy drinking society, and it still is a heavy drinking society, and a bad diet. We had a very bad diet, and we still do have quite a bad diet. We've got a lot of sweet things and a lot of fried food. So we actually have a very high stroke incidence in Scotland. The other speciality I did was diabetic foot ulcer clinics. We did 2 multidisciplinary team clinics per week in different hospitals. And one was on a Monday, one was on a Friday. And I did that for 15 years. Again, mostly of it's diabetic, it's type 2. It's usually because it's mostly males that come in, heavy smokers, drinkers. A lot of them are divorced, so they eat badly, they drink heavily, so they don't take their medicine when they should take. So they end up having a lot of hypos, bad eyesight, neuropathy of their feet, can't feel their feet, don't see their feet, end up with ulcers. And we have them, and we try to, with podiatrists, a doctor, nurses, dietitian, we try to cure their feet. Scotland's got a really good record on prosthetics and on the whole graphic of how many people, because it's such a small country, and there are only 5 million people in Scotland. So since the 70s, we've actually kept really, really good records. And the average age of an amputee, and getting an amputee, is actually 76. So that's the average. So we have many people who are actually in their 80s getting amputated. 50% of people who get amputated in Scotland never receive a limb. And the reason they don't receive a limb is because they can't walk from here to the door. Because they've got, again, been heavy smokers, heavy drinkers, bad vascular problems, and so they end up getting amputated. They always call it, it's a failure because they had an amputation. But in some ways it is, because they waited too long, and usually their health is so bad that they end up 50% of them sitting in a chair. It's something like, if you have one leg cut in Scotland, or amputated, you live on average 5 years. If you have 2 legs cut off, you live 2 years. Again, because of your health. So it's not, a lot of people, that was one of the reasons why I didn't ever wanted to go into prosthetics, because I always thought prosthetics was quite a depressing place in Scotland, because you generally work with a very elderly population who have very bad health, and you think, I'm going to fit a limb to this person, I know this person will never live for more than 5 years. So for me, I never wanted to go into that. I always felt that orthotics was a bit more of a challenge, and people you'd see for much longer. the type of people we saw for in orthotics was a lot of diabetics. We saw a lot of rheumatology. Scotland's got a very high rate of arthritis, again because of cold, damp weather. It's very cold, it's very damp. It's, as my brother always says, you know, it's when it's summer, you can take off a jacket and you can leave your jumper on, because it's never warm in Scotland. We never, even, I mean, I know some of you have been to Britain, but in the summer, if Scotland gets 20 degrees, that's an amazing summer. Winter, we have minus.
Can I ask you some specific
Yes.
issues
Yeah.
for sharing with us?
Yes.
What are the functional implication of prosthetics? After prosthetics, for example, total one limb prosthetics, hand prosthetics, after set and rehabilitate with prosthetics,
Yeah.
what are the functional implication?
Um,
How they can do the function?
if they're young,
Yeah.
as I've already said, the average age is 76.
Yeah.
So the number of young people that come in are not that many. When they do come in, the prosthetist is usually really quite happy because they've got someone young to deal with, and they will actually spend a lot of money on young people.
Yeah.
So they will give them the best of limbs. You know, these ones that you see on television, like when you see the Paralympics and you see them running, that's the sort of thing they will give someone who's young.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they will get really rehabilitated well. They work very well with physios and occupational therapists, and there are a high rate of them getting back to employment.
So the functional implication will be depends upon how the patient
Yeah.
will rehabilitate
Yes, yes,
and how
Yeah.
set up the prosthetic
Yeah.
limbs and
Yeah.
how they use it, how
Yeah.
they get trained,
Yes.
and how the related muscle function,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of rehabilitation,
I know.
proceed on.
Yeah, I mean
So-
the major reason that people get amputated in Britain if they're young is motorbike accident.
Yeah, yeah.
But even that, I was saying to Imran, my cousin had a motorbike, or he was on a cycle and he had an accident. He was in hospital for a year and a half. They tried to save his leg for a year and a half until he said, I don't want this anymore, please cut off my leg. But they were trying to save it because the last thing they do with young people is amputate. They try not to amputate in Britain. One of the other so if someone comes in from a motorbike accident, they will rehabilitate them really well. The other reason that people get amputated in Britain, young people, is drug addicts, is dirty syringes into the leg. Then you have a real problem with, because then you've got a social problem. They're drug addicts, the drug dependency. And I remember a patient of mine, which is quite a funny story, but we had to bar him from the prosthetic centre because we were bringing in drugs inside his artificial leg and trying to sell them to patients. So we ended up having to bar him to say, you can't come in here and try to sell drugs. It was terrible. So you do have a real social problem there, because most of the drug addicts come in and they're ready. They don't have a job. A lot of them are uneducated, etc. So that type of person is very difficult to rehabilitate.
For your kind information, after getting prosthetic limb, some of athletes, they even own the gold prize in the Olympic and
Yeah.
Paralympic also.
Yeah,
So if the people get proper rehabilitation
Yeah.
after getting the limb, then they can do everything as like
yeah.
usual people.
Oh, aye.
So it's highly valuable role from the side of orthotics
Oh,
and
aye.
prosthetics in combination with the other rehabilitation
Yeah,
processes.
physios, OTs.
Physios, occupational therapists, and related
Speech
support.
as well can be.
Even though, as we say always that how we manage the patient we manage the client as by the biopsychosocial model.
Mm.
We are giving biological support properly,
Yeah.
but we didn't give the psychological support and also the
No.
social, meet the social requirement. Then the rehabilitation will not be.
No. I mean, they have, yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean,
so-
they have people who come in, and we'll talk to them when they're in hospital, if they're young, and we'll, you know, if it's an accident,
Yeah, yeah.
and we'll talk to them. They have ex-patients that come back who are amputees. My cousin's one of them. He goes to hospital and he talks about being an amputee.
So no doubt that it's very, very important in disability management and
Yeah.
rehabilitation from the aspect of orthotics and prosthetics. And how long we shall stay in Bangladesh?
Oh, and this time not long. I'm actually going back on Monday.
And
Visa
when you shall come back again?
next winter. I miss the summer.
Next winter.
Yeah.
So when you shall come, we are requesting you that you shall give us a pre-planned lecture upon the importance of orthotics and prosthetics for disability management and rehabilitation.
Right, I will.
So hopefully, I think we shall see you all again in our class, and he will give us a valuable lecture upon the orthotics and prosthetics for the disability management and rehabilitation, and that will be the pre-planned class, and I think all of us we shall enjoy this. And today also we enjoy his experience and sharing, and we are giving much thanks to him from our class and from the university. And thank you very much.
No,
to
thank
give
you.
us,
Thank you for this opportunity.
experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.